A lot of the African-American history here in the city, the stories haven't been told. We're just locked in on the stories now.
My grandparents went to this school. My grandmother would tell me stories about going to the school.
My degree is not in history, that's for sure, but it's something that I've kind of gravitated toward. I've always said if I didn't study music, I would have studied history.
My project is focusing on Black cemeteries altogether, but specifically Evergreen Cemetery here in Richmond, Virginia.
What I'm looking at are families who lived along Grays Creek. I am valuing them. I'm looking at them, through a different set of lenses now.
My name is Michael Johnson. I was born and raised here in Alexandria, Virginia. So about 7 years ago, prior to my mother's passing, we would ride past Douglas Cemetery and it would look like it was abandoned. It was full of vegetation and shrubbery and everything. And she would always say, "You have family members buried over there." And I said, "Mom, there's nothing over there but trees and woods. None of my people are buried there. There can't be any of our people over in this cemetery." At the time, we didn't even know the name of the cemetery. By her telling me and us riding past there that I had family members over there, I was very inquisitive about that. I wanted to see who they were. So I went over to one of the local funeral homes and I started to inquire about some of the names that I knew were family members to find out where they was buried at. And lo and behold, Green Funeral Home gave me a list of about 8 of my relatives that was buried over in Douglas. So by me researching those funeral home and then going over to the cemetery and actually finding my family members, I started wondering how did they end up in a cemetery that was in despair. So I was intrigued by this because I said, now I'm finding out some of my family history. And it was history that was never told by my parents. I started locating different grave sites. And then I saw that some of the headstones had fallen over, some of them had been broken. The cemetery, the grass was high again. So I started advocating for that cemetery, not knowing what I was getting myself into, because right now it's been about 7 years and ongoing. And when I'm looking at this project, I'll probably be here for the next 20 years until I can really find all the information I need. I took it personal because my family members was there, but while I was concentrating on them, some said, well, what about the other people? So that made me say, well, I gotta find their family members as well, because maybe there's a link in here somewhere for all of us to find some type of closure. The only research and the data that was written by Mr. Pippinger. If it wasn't for Mr. Pippinger, Douglas Cemetery would no longer exist. And I think by him doing his research back in the earlier years, it gave us a road map to where I'm at now. I wanted to find other people that had loved ones buried there. So from that phase, I went on to just started documenting on my own the work that I had been doing. A lot of the African-American history here in the city, the stories haven't been told. We're just locked in on the stories now. So I want to make sure that while we focus in on these stories, that we get as clear a picture as we can of those buried at Douglas Cemetery. A lot of historical people are buried in Douglas Cemetery that made big contributions to this city and what it is today. And I don't want to see their efforts go to waste. My great-grandfather, my grandfather, and my dad couldn't talk. So what they couldn't say, I'm going to say, and I'm going to make sure that their story is told. And not only their story, but the story of the 2,200 people buried at Douglas Cemetery. At Douglas, I want to put a memorial up, a granite wall with a bust of Frederick Douglass, but my main goal is to make sure that I preserve the history of Frederick Douglass Cemetery and why it was named after Frederick Douglass. In September, we're going to start where they're going to level the ground, mark where some of the graves are, to fill it in with dirt and level it out, remove some of the headstones and replace them. We're going to mark them and replace them. And the good thing about it is that some of the stakeholders and the descendants can be a part of the restoration of the cemetery. Well, this fellowship means to me is it's giving me the opportunity to share with others what preservation work is really about, what history is really about. It will enhance and enrich the work that needs to be done at Douglas. It's helping me and us get to the finish line, and I think that's very important.
I'm originally from Albemarle County, from this neighborhood. So I grew up here. The stories that I tell of African American history center around this neighborhood and Charlottesville and the state of Virginia. Growing up here was special for me. I grew up riding my bike up and down this road all day long, with my grandmother having to call down to someone's house for me to come home to eat. My grandparents went to this school. So growing up, my grandmother would tell me stories about going to the school. And I would ride my bike past the school, back and forth all day long. Years later, I kind of learned more about the history of the school and wanted to get involved. So this project with the fellowship is centered around the St. John Rosenwald School, but also is an oral history of the 16 or so alumni that are still with us from this school. The school opened in 1922 and it closed in 1954. This project follows the alumni and their experiences as students at this school, but it not only tells the story of the experiences of the alumni here at the school, but also connects us to the nearby church and the experiences there, as well as the fact that many of the alumni also went on to desegregate Albemarle County schools in 1963 and are the descendants of the former enslaved. I think the importance of oral history in African American culture is that we need to tell our own stories. So a lot of times these stories are not stories that are in books, that are taught in schools. Only our elders can tell these stories straight from their experiences. We're able to attach ourselves to our elders and allow them to guide us through their stories and their experiences. I think that's very valuable, but also our elders are passing on. They're no longer with us. Even in the work that I do and the films that I make, a lot of folks have passed on that have been in previous films, but now we have them on camera sharing those histories with us directly. The African American Fellowship has helped this work, one, to kind of organize people together in telling this story, and for me, helping me to connect with like-minded people whom within their projects and also Preservation Virginia is working towards a common goal of preserving African American history and African American stories through this fellowship. I hope that this project will be one that gives life to the building. My hopes is that as school groups come into the building, the next generation comes into the building for school trips and they learn more about the building, that they'll also learn more about the people who were here and learned here through the documentary directly from those voices. This project is really important to me because this neighborhood is where I feel most at home. I love to travel. I've lived in other places, but this place is always home. Some of the elders that would watch me as I would ride my bike up and down the road, they're still here today and they're still sitting on those same front porches. And now they're watching me as I drive by and I blow my horn and wave at them as they're on their porch knitting, or Miss Bird is doing her stamp collection on her front porch and that sort of thing. So this community is important to me. There's so much of my own family history right here within just a couple of square miles, and I'm dedicated to it, to preserving it. A lot of times with our elders, we won't get certain answers unless we ask the right question. You're not necessarily going to have them freely just tell you stories, but if you jog their memory, you'll learn some amazing things about where you come from and those folks that came before you. Reach out to your elders and spend time with them. I think if we don't tell our own stories and tell our own history, that not only will they not get told, but they'll be even further lost.
Grew up here in Fluvanny County, graduated from the high school, came through the school system, and then I went off to Longwood College to study music education. My degree is not in history, that's for sure, but it's something that I've kind of gravitated toward. I've always said if I didn't study music, I would have studied history. And how I got it kind of into the history side of things is for African American History Month, kind of fell in my lap to produce something for our high school shows. And so part of that was producing music, getting the students to learn some African American music, and then start digging into the history of African American history, civil rights movement, gospel music, the gamut of the African American experience. What I'm doing for Preservation Virginia really is twofold. Number one, we're identifying historic sites here in Fluvanna County, especially kind of south of the Rivanna River and along the James River. And I'm identifying those sites for the purpose of showing that African Americans really built these places. And they're so much part of the African American experience. Part one is kind of to identify them, film them, and do commentary. And then the second part is to get what we call descendant engagement. Because in a lot of these areas, those people who worked on the plantations that were on the James and the Rivanna, our descendants are still here. But we have been systematically cut off from our history as African Americans. And so my goal is to reattach our lives to these places and spaces so that as African Americans we can begin to take ownership of the places that we live. All this process really does come down to my family. My family was enslaved by John Hart Wilcock on this plantation called Bremo. And as a child, we kind of knew that that was the case. And also as a child, we grew up 3 miles from the plantation. And so as I found this out, and then we began to attach names and places and people and cemeteries and the whole story of my family being in this area since the late 1700s was just very empowering. One of the greatest things it does for me is you just know how deep and how long your family has been in a place. You know, the same, I grew up on a road called Teepee Town Road. That same road, as a kid, I was riding my bike and, walking with my sisters, and 4 generations before me were doing the same thing. They were walking on these same paths and these same roads. And so it just gives you such a deep sense of ownership and place and belonging. Like there is a place where your family started. And a lot of African Americans don't have that. That's really changed my sense of where I live. So I want to be involved in my community because my ancestors were involved in this community and part of building it. This African American Fellowship program, I think first and foremost, it kind of legitimized what I'm doing. People are recognizing the work, and so you feel like you're on the right path. And it makes me kind of go further into these ideas. Coming out on the other side of this, I feel like that maybe I'll be able to produce a better product, be more succinct in my storytelling, and get those technical skills down to where I want them to be. The importance of preserving this history is because at this time in America and in our society, there is a real push to kind of reshape the narrative, change the narrative, re-emphasize what's important, what's not important. And we know systemically and historically African American places and stories have been pushed to the side. So I think now is so important to really bring these stories to bear and to just, whether you're black or white or whatever culture you're coming from, that you understand that African Americans have been here from the beginning.
So I was born and raised here in Richmond, Virginia. I grew up in the North Side, around so many historic places. So I had all of these historic and wonderful role models around me during that time. So I was greatly, deeply honored to be a part of Preservation Virginia. My project is focusing on Black cemeteries altogether, but specifically Evergreen Cemetery here in Richmond, Virginia. Evergreen was founded in 1891, and it has had its ups and downs ever since. Evergreen has so many stories embedded into the cemetery. It is about 60 acres of people interred there, ancestors, all either African American, Indian. They have some Asians that are buried there. It's amazing to see the stories that I have uncovered so far. Evergreen has had its downs as well. For about 50 to 60 years, it has been unkept. So people have taken it upon their own personal selves to go in to kind of clean up Evergreen Cemetery. And that's one of the reasons why I chose that Evergreen to be a part of our project. It's really important that we do African American cemetery work because there are a lot of lives at stake here. Because Richmond was the capital of the Confederacy, African Americans had to go through a lot of turmoil and a lot of strife. They had to go through a lot of what we don't have to go through today. So it's because of them that many African Americans are where they are today. It's because of the off of the backs of their hard work and off of their emotional turmoil that they had to endure. Preservation Virginia has helped me with more research tools, a network of individuals that I can talk to in regards to cemetery or just in preservation altogether. It's also put me in front of preservationists that I didn't know looked like me. So I feel honored to be a part of this population now, to be able to make an impact and for today and for my children and my children's children. What I hope to accomplish with my Preservation Virginia project is a plethora of things. Starting the project, I just didn't know how deep and how much of a rabbit hole that I would go into. And it just took me on a lot of branches that I just didn't know was there. It's hard to find records for Evergreen. I found the oldest continuous running funeral home in Richmond, Virginia, which is Scott's Funeral Home. And I found that Mr. Lambert had all of the records starting from 1910. And I was able to go through those records. And what I found is that they say there are only 10,000 individuals interred at Evergreen Cemetery. And I found a record that said that in the new section alone, it's 45,000 graves to be sold. So between 1891 to 1950, how many other headstones or graves that they have? So it's more than 10,000. So one of the things that I wanted to do with this project is to kind of debunk some of the untruths that are out there. I know that I would eventually go along this path to do this work. Preservation Virginia has helped me in doing so. It's sped up my process, of course, and it's given me the tools to do the process in a systematic and technical way. My final product from this work is one, I'm going to do a research presentation. And within that presentation, I'll talk about some of the individuals that are interred there. I am actually putting together a website for Evergreen Cemetery. What I want to do with the website is to open it up for individuals who have stories of their family to send that information in, and then we can place their story on the website so that people can find family, people can do the things that they need to do in their genealogical and historical research as well.
I was born at Fort Lee, Virginia. Now it's Fort Gregg Adams in Prince George's County a long time ago, 1961. And I was brought to Surrey shortly after birth, and that's where I grew up. Surrey County is rural. It's one of the last rural golden spots in eastern Virginia. There's no interstate, and so it has missed a lot of development. The pace is slower, and there was a time before I left home that I knew everybody. This project is a project of genealogy. What I'm looking at are families who lived along Grays Creek. I've been doing genealogical research since 1980. I stumbled into this type of research. My father died in 1980 of colon cancer, and I was 19 years old. I fell or plunged into just a pretty pitiful place of grief and depression. I discovered that what I was really looking for and what I needed was connection. With his death, I felt that connection was lost. And I can remember working on a school project, and I was in the basement of Alderman Library. And I happened to pass by the door of the public documents for the state. It just so happened that the break in records was between Surrey County and Southampton County, And if it was a break, that meant that the name of the county would have been on the drawer. Well, there was Surry County, Virginia. And, you know, I'm in Charlottesville. Why do they have Surry County, Virginia records? So I just pulled the drawer out, being nosy. There was microfilm for census records for Surry. I began to look at it, and I found a family that was headed by Martha J. Harrison. Underneath her name was the name Patrick Harrison. I knew it was my family because all of the names that followed Patrick I recognized. I even saw my great-grandfather's name. I said, you know, this is incredible. And I started writing down all of those names. I was able to bring those generations forward and make the connections with all of the people that I knew at home. The advice that I would give to persons starting or interested in genealogical research is to start with older family members. Get some stories and identify some names. And so when you begin to research, you can at least be familiar with these names. It never dawned on me that the people I was researching basically lived along the creek. And as I continued to look at this, the common theme between the homesteads or in land ownership for this group of people was Gray's Creek. It is helping me to understand and to appreciate more the property that they may have purchased, the things that they may have handed down. I am valuing them. I'm looking at them, you know, through a different set of lenses now. The Preservation Virginia African American Fellowship gives it, you know, in my mind, a little more credibility. Somebody has recognized it as being valuable. It's valuable to me, but Preservation Virginia, and particularly the African American Fellowship Program, has indicated that this is valuable and can be valuable to many others. It is my hope that I'm able to publish this for future generations, to put it in a form, to hand it off, and these young people can take this as a foundation piece and pass it on even to future generations.